When people don't say anything, trust me, they've made assumptions. And assumptions are the lowest level of knowledge. They're planning without the conversations. They're just saying, you know what? I can't see any sense of progress here. It doesn't look like there's any plans for me here. And because they don't know, they're not going to ask you to find out. They're just going to make their plans, plan their exits, plan something for themselves. So I would say if you're not communicating on a deeper level, then it's a red flag.
Welcome to the People Managing People podcast. We're on a mission to build a better world of work and to help you create happy, healthy, and productive workplaces. I'm your host, David Rice. My guest today is Adora Ikwuemesi. As you could maybe tell from the audio quality in that excerpt at the start, this episode was recorded a little differently. Adora and I met at a conference back at the beginning of May called Running Remote. It's a 2-day showcase of all things remote work, from best practices to new studies and new technology. Adora was speaking at the conference, presenting some research she'd done about remote engagement, looking specifically at a group of employees in Nigeria. I wanted to sit down for a deep dive with her on the topic. So between sessions and networking hours, we found a shady spot out of the Texas heat and had the following chat. Forgive the birds and the background noise, but hey, such is the challenge of recording live and in person. So without further ado, here's my chat with Adora. So you conducted a qualitative study of 24 remote workers in Nigeria. And I'm curious, what initially inspired you to deep dive into remote engagement research, and what surprised you the most about what you found?
Well, I'd say I was an employee a long time ago. I've been running my own business for 15 years, but there was a time I was disengaged myself. And I've always been curious, especially when I became a manager. I was curious. I mean, I've experienced disengagement myself, and I was curious about what made people engaged at work. And then the pandemic hit, and we all had to work remotely. And I thought, okay, we've been pursuing the subject of engagement without much. And now we have to work remotely. So I thought, you know what? It would be good. I was just embarking on a doctorate research, and I knew I wanted to study engagement. But then, because we were working remotely, I thought it would be very interesting to study engagement in remote work because it would be very relevant. And even though at the time it wasn't clear if we were going to continue working remotely or go back to the office, I knew that this would be game-changing if I could gather some insights and help people who were working remotely understand engagement in remote work settings.
Now, the framework that you created, it identifies 7 key drivers of remote work engagement. Can you kind of take us through that a little bit? And I'm curious, which driver do organizations most consistently kind of overlook, and why is it so critical?
Okay, the thing is, the good things, I knew that by studying engagement, it's not anything that we've not heard about, right? So these 7 drivers, they're probably not areas that we're not familiar with, right? Like things like leadership, things like work, the way work is designed, or like the environment. However, remote work is a different context, okay? When we work in the office, it's a different work environment. Remote work is characterized by 3 main characteristics. 1, lone working, you're working alone. 2, there's a reliance on technology, you need technology to be connected. And thirdly, but nowhere least, is the fact that, it involves autonomy, and 80% of people actually work at home. So looking at those factors, it's a different context, because when we're in the office is a standardized environment, right? But if 80% of people are working from their home, it means that your office is different from my office, it's different from her office, it's different from Tom's office, Sarah's office. So we don't have a standard office. I may have a dedicated space with a desk, a fancy chair, and you, on the other hand, may be working in the same room with your sister, or you might be sharing or sitting on the floor. Exactly. Or if you're like some of the remote workers that, I work with, you might share a room. You might live in a very noisy environment.
Yeah.
You may not have a nice desk, or you might just be using a table in the kitchen. Yeah. And then, of course, you might be in a city that has power outages, like in Africa, where it's prone, or the internet connection may not be great. So that in itself changes the context, the environmental context. And that was very key for the study. So when we talk about the factors, we talk about 7 factors, right? Some of them we already know. In fact, all of them we already know. And I'll just run through them. Lifestyle benefits. It's a factor. What do I mean by that? People love working remotely. The flexibility is a benefit. And if you take it away from people, people will not be happy. So that's an obvious one, because when you look at the debates online, you see that people are like, I don't want to return to the office. If they make me return to the office, I'm quitting. So I think that's an obvious one. Leadership and management, hey, come on. Good leadership is essential. If your leadership cares, if you feel like, you have good HR management practices, good policies, those are obvious. Those enhance engagement, because some companies started working remotely by accident, so they didn't have policies. Some leaders, some of the reasons why you're getting the return to office mandates are because the leadership doesn't trust the employees. They think they're not working. So things like that. So leadership and management is another driver. Another one is relationships and communication. That's very key, because one of the things that gets cut off when you start working remotely is the connection, the human connection. Even though people tend to say, nah, work is work, but working remotely disconnects. And when you're in the office, connection happens by accident. It happens all the time. You just walk in by, past each other. Hey, hi, you catch up. But when you're working remotely,
You have to be conscious.
you have to be very intentional about it. So relationship and communication, that was, one of the drivers. Another driver, a very key one, was work design. The way work is set up, whether it's meaningful, whether it's purposeful, and whether it's fun. You talked about surprising. One of the most surprising was fun. I couldn't believe how frequently people mentioned fun work. I was like, gosh, isn't work just work? But people having fun at work with other people was very key. So fun work, I would say, for me, was the most surprising. I couldn't believe how many times people mentioned. Another key factor, which is, I would say, obvious now, is the environment. I remember I already mentioned that remote work is a different work environment anyway. So environmental factors. And when we talk about environmental factors, I consider your immediate environment, which is your workspace. So that's the ergonomics, your chair, but also things like heat, noise, which people don't really consider. Yeah. And even the environment, the national context, the country. Because in the Nigerian context, power outages were an issue, the infrastructure. And how does this affect engagement? I want to work, but they've just cut off the power supply. So no matter how motivated and energized I am, someone talked to me about having to join a session with a torchlight, right? Yeah. Imagine having to do a Zoom session with a torchlight. That's not something that happens in a certain environment. It may not happen in America, but it has happened to people who have to face power outages. So the environment, that is another big one that people, and I would love to see more, obviously research in that area, because environment plays a really big issue that I would say that people tend not to mention, right? How many factors have we done now?
You mentioned the power outages. And
Yeah.
I think, I'm from Florida originally.
Yeah.
And you have like hurricanes, and it'll knock the power out for 3 weeks.
Oh, wow.
And so
exactly.
after a few days, and you get the stuff cleaned up, you want to start your life back.
Yes.
But now it's 2.5 weeks before you're going to have electricity.
Exactly.
Or you got to run off a generator, and there's only certain things that you can run. And if you're choosing between, your laptop and the fridge.
Yes, exactly.
And so there's like this real tension that it creates inside you. The stress levels are so high.
Yeah. So another one I would mention are personal factors. This is one that we need to look at. And when I mean personal factors, like your own individual context, from your level of digital competence, like how good are you working digitally? Another one is your personal drive. Right? Like one of the CEOs I interviewed told me, he said something that stuck with me. He said, some people are great, but they're not great on their own. Yeah. Something came out from the research, discipline, self-discipline, right? So people's ability to be self-disciplined really affects them when they're working remotely. So if you're someone who struggles with drive and discipline, I mean, working remotely can be quite a struggle. Yeah. So that one came up. And the good thing was, like, I saw it in other research, right? And it was good to see it play again, because some people said, yes, this is an issue. This affects my engagement at work. And I would say the last or not least was obviously technology. Right? Technology binds remote work. Without technology, you cannot connect. You need collaborative tools. The better tools you have to collaborate, the better you would help communication, which helps connection. And then, with technology, like I said, there is also a relationship, because the environment affects technology with power, internet, and things like that. And then the tools, hardware, software. So those were the key drivers. And just like I said, I think the surprising ones were fun. When you manage people, the thing is, like, when you're young, of course you understand fun, but somehow there seems to be some kind of amnesia when people get and management. You're like, well, let's get the work done. What are these people talking about?
Get it done and go home, right?
Yeah. But you know what? I saw how important it was for people to actually enjoy work. Like, people they are more engaged in things that they enjoy or has meaning to them, impact. Yeah, that type of thing. So yes, that was something that I would say, be more intentional about. In a remote setting, be more intentional. It won't happen by accident. So it has to be designed. Connection has to be designed, not by accident.
Some leaders get sucked into kind of thinking that engagement is really just like, it's about communication frequency in particular. So in your research, what have you found engagement truly feels like for people and for remote employees in particular?
Yeah, I mean, what I would say is that frequency, the quality is better than quantity. What I did find was that most people felt it was important to be engaged. They felt it was important. So no one said no communication, but I think the key thing was the quality of the communication, right? You might be communicating with me frequently, but it's like you're micromanaging me because you're always checking. Right? So that's a different kind of communication. Like, hey, what's the status? Where are you now? But then, like, I had a meeting just last week, and I have one of the project managers, great guy, and we hadn't met for a while because it's a remote team, that particular project team. And he just went into the agenda, and I'm like, hey. I mean, we've not spoken for a while, all of us. And I said, no. Before we start, can we just check in on everybody? And I asked everybody one by one, and what has your high for the year been, and what has your low been? Like, just random. I said, I'll start first. And I started like that. So it was supposed to be a 1 hour meeting. Yes, we went past the agenda. We ended up spending 2 hours. But guess what? That 30 minutes spent checking in with everyone, I mean, I found out so much, things that I would never.
Yeah.
And guess what? The meeting, people's discretionary effort was higher. They voluntarily contributed much more. And then after the meeting, I got like text messages, people saying, hey, thank you, like that. Like, even I was dreading the meeting. Like, but the quality of the meeting was so much better. Right. Yeah. So those are things like connecting with people on a personal level, and it helps you with context, because I found out things that I would never have found out. And it allowed me, the human elements, like, people need that. And some people they just need someone to share things with. We don't even realize that we want to share. Like, people were not expecting to share, but they shared so much because I guess some of their struggles, they hadn't voiced it out to anyone yet. So it was like an unexpected, I don't know, maybe therapy session. We didn't plan for it, but it was a productive meeting. And I see from the responses after, I don't usually get text messages after from my team members saying, hey, thank you. And but I could see that it was worth it. Yeah.
You talk about the importance of conducting an engagement audit.
Yes.
And for HR and people ops leaders, what are the essential early warning signs of disengagement that they should be looking for in a remote team?
Yeah, a disconnection. Yeah, I mean, it's so easy to be like coming back again to the conversation when people say work is work, just when people haven't spoken for a while, you don't even know what has happened and transpired. And when I mean spoken, meaningful conversation, it's not about the status reports, like, hey, where are we on this project, right? It's about all the unspoken activities. And sometimes people don't ask questions because you feel like when you hear the answers, you might have to solve it, right? So like, I'm not gonna ask how you're doing. Yeah, exactly. So people just like, how are you doing? Fine. And that's why people respond that way because people don't want to get involved. But the truth is that if meaningful conversations are not having, that is a red flag, right? Because of the lowest level of knowledge. They're planning without the conversations. They're just saying, you know what? I can't see any sense of progress here. It doesn't look like there's any plans for me here. And because they don't know, they're not going to ask you to find out. They're just going to make their plans, plan their exits, plan something for themselves. So I would say if you're not communicating on a deeper level, then it's a red flag. Don't think that because you're not communicating, everything is fine. No, if you don't know anything on a deeper level, that's a red flag because it will just shock you. One day it will come out and you'll be like, oh, I didn't know. And well, that's how it goes.
Yeah. Oh, one thing leaders struggle with is sort of sustaining engagement over time, right?
Yes, yes.
And based on your framework, I guess, what strategies kind of separate organizations that get short-term engagement bumps from their efforts versus those that have more lasting change?
Yeah, I think so. It might just seem like what's the word now? Like we're flogging the same issue. But, there's transformational change and there's like transactional, right?
Right.
And transactional can be things like, of course, you might get high engagement because, maybe there's a financial reward or something like that.
Right.
But the truth is that real engagement comes from lasting connections. It comes from lasting relationships. It comes from open communication and shared experiences, right? So if you don't intentionally create the forum for open, honest human conversations, you're never really going to have engagement that is true. And then, also when we talk about engagement, we talk about authentic people bringing their whole selves to work. Like people need to feel connected. And what does connection mean? It's about feeling, it's an experience. People need to experience that they are seen, that they're heard, right? Okay, and that they are valued. So when people don't have that experience, then they feel disconnected.
Yeah.
So how do you make people feel seen, right? How are you doing? Like, how was your day? How has your year been? And really wanting to know the answers.
Yeah.
And then people's voice needs to matter in those meetings. Someone is not speaking up rather than saying, okay, that's a good thing, right? Bring them into the conversation and then being valued. Are you recognizing them? Are you praising them for the progress that they've made? So being seen, being heard, and being valued, those three things are very key for connection. And I would say that leaders, the more you practice that, and practice makes perfect, and that helps us.
There's some discussion, I think it was somebody brought it up in your session even about cultural differences in remote work. Did you uncover any insights that would be particularly valuable, I guess, for global organizations managing remote teams that are across different regions and countries?
Yeah. Try and understand the context, okay? And just like you said, when you're working globally, there's some problems that people encounter in a global environment that you could never know. I remember a situation where even like I had an employee leave and he returned a laptop. And at that time, I was really cross at the state of the laptop. And I made a statement and I was like, this person must have been using it on the floor. Like it was so scratched, it was so rough. And then it did occur to me that, that was the context. I couldn't, why assume? Do you know where this person is actually working? Do they actually have a space to work? Maybe they're sharing a room. Maybe she's literally on the floor. Like, sometimes we take it for granted. Everyone doesn't have a dedicated desk, a dedicated office.
Yeah.
So understand the nuances and know that, like everybody's circumstance is different, right? Especially younger people. Like we talk a lot about Gen Z this, Gen Z that. I'm like, I don't want to hear any conversation about it. Their context is different, you know? They're not in the same, they don't have the same issues that you may have. They don't own their own homes, they don't own their own spaces, and they're young. Who wasn't clueless or, you know, like, I mean, when I was young, I was disengaged at work. I don't know why we pretend like we were really like responsible. I wasn't responsible. I didn't consider myself responsible, and I admit it freely now. But I think, you know, we need to mentor, we need to help people, we need to guide people, but don't act like you were all like responsible when you were younger.
You just had it all together.
Nah, you didn't have it. We all passed around at work and yeah. So those kind of things, context matters. Yeah.
If a company could do only one thing starting tomorrow
Yes.
to immediately start improving remote engagement based on your research,
Yes.
what would you tell them to do first?
I would say connect. I would say connect by design, not by accident. That's what I would say.
That's a good answer.
Okay.
Well, before we go, there's always two things I do on every podcast episode. First thing is I want to give you a chance to, you know, tell people about where they can connect with you and find out more about what you're doing.
Oh, fantastic. The best place to connect with me is LinkedIn. So you can search for me, Adora Ikwuemesi, and you find me on LinkedIn. That's the best place.
So the second thing that to finish every episode, I have a little tradition. You get to ask me a question. So go ahead, ask me anything you want.
I see. What keeps you engaged at work?
It's a lot of things. All right. So I'm a naturally fairly driven person, I would say. I have a lot of pride in my work, and I'm very driven by the idea that maybe I can create something new or just something that will like cheer people up or be useful or even inspire one of my colleagues. But if I'm really honest, it's a lot of, how do I put this? It's a lot of childhood psychological trauma about financial insecurity that drives me nuts. If I'm being completely honest, I'm terrified of not being able to provide for my family or myself. You know what I mean? Like that is my childhood. We didn't have a lot.
Yeah.
And so and there was some insecurity there. Finances was a big issue in like my parents' relationship. So one of the things that I saw kind of shaped my perception. And, you know, I'm being very open here, vulnerable. But I have to look at that and say to myself, like, you can go easy. You can stop getting out of like flight or fight or panic mode. You don't have to like kill to survive. You know what I mean? You can just be you, and it's okay. But it's hard. It's hard to turn that off because that's a thing that's always in the back of your mind.
Always there. And our childhood shapes us, whether we admit it or not. That is it. It's either fear or love. They're two sides of the same, you know, the same coin. Yes. That was a big question.
Thank you for giving me some of your time today.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit more about your work.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's a pleasure. Thank you, David.